a main feed session.
Oh, the main feed. We have an absolute blockbuster for you coming up. The battle of two intellectual titans of the freedom movement, Rand versus Hayek. Now, myself, I'm a Rand man because I personally am not intimidated by strong women, but we'll see what the panel has to say. Over to you, Topher.
All righty. Well, with that introduction, and what more introduction could you want? We have Eamonn, we have Jennifer, and with apologies, we have Barbara joining us, and I'll get them to each introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about who you are. And Eamonn, why don't you kick us off with your thoughts on this topic of Rand versus Hayek?
Well, my name is Eamonn Butler, and I'm director of the Adam Smith Institute, which is a think tank in London. And I've written a book on Hayek, and I've written a book on Ayn Rand, so I know a little bit about them. Interestingly, they met only once at a party that was thrown for both of them, and we only have Hayek's account, but Hayek said that they were introduced and they exchanged a few words, and then Rand turned on a heel and said, "You're a compromiser," and stormed off. And I can see why she might have said that, and I think I can see why he might have been annoyed at that. Because one of the interesting things is that how Rand is very much of a coherent philosophy, and I think some people think you have to take the whole thing or you don't take anything at all, whereas Hayek was very much more open-minded, I suppose I would say, in that he believed that there was nothing known for certain, and that human beings make mistakes, and all that we can do is to propose theories rather than get a grasp on objective knowledge. So there's all these things, but at the same time, Hayek is very much for the sort of mature, abstruse thinker, if you like, whereas Ayn Rand, her great appeal and I think her major contribution to the movement is the fact that she draws in so many young people. They read her novels and they're hooked. And so I think both of them have different contributions. I think both of them have problems as well. So I think probably the best thing I can do is hand over to Barbara, who's going to tell us why we should all be praising Hayek.
Well, thank you very much, Eamonn. I mean, first of all, you're a gentleman who is not afraid of ladies, and it's great that Jennifer and I can discuss and dispute a little bit about our great heroes that we keep defending across the world. And don't get me wrong, I'm a Hayekian, of course, but I really, I think the contributions that Mrs. Rand made were wonderful. And so it's not one or the other, it's both created added value to our movement. I think that this is the most important thing. And of course, I will cheer for Hayek, because running the Hayek Institute in Vienna and running the Austrian Economic Center, you're closer to Hayek, or I am closer to Hayek. And also in my understanding and also in our entire work that we do with the Free Market Roadshow and other institutes. But coming back to the point, first of all, Hayek is responsible for us even sitting here and discussing and disputing. He was the driving force of the liberal revival, the classical liberal revival after World War II, and of the founding of the Mont Pelerin Society, which would bring together all those classical liberal thinkers in a time when our ideas were most needed. And I think they're needed now even more. And he was the intellectual foundation for Lady Thatcher and also for Ronald Reagan, but also for many other successful politicians. So he was put into practice in economic policies. His work was tested, and he was also hugely debated. And I think there is one difference that I would like to mention right away, and you already touched a little bit upon that, Eamonn. Hayek was a very humble gentleman. He was patient, he could listen, and he was able to dispute, to have a great academic dispute. And I think this is something that is of a huge advantage for all academics if you have those values. Second, well, Hayek's theory of how a great society works, a great liberal order full of voluntary human cooperation, comes into being only through this process of his spontaneous order. Always remember, keep in mind, he defined this term spontaneous order in the most beautiful way to describe our globalized world now and how it came into being and what makes a constant government intervention so problematic as would threaten this order. I will later discuss the road to serfdom, where he especially focuses on this centrally planned societies and economies and against the totalitarianism that back then, when he was writing this in the late 40s of the last century, was so evident. But he constantly was fighting against the socialism and centralization. So Hayek, but I would like to come back to the spontaneous order first. And underpinning Hayek's spontaneous order is the early insight he had about the market and about competition as a dynamic process. Remember the word catalaxy that he also introduced and that was discussed by the Austrian school. So particularly how prices function as signals to consumers and to producers. This was put into very simply words and explanatory terms by Hayek. So in contrast to the mainstream economists, especially the equilibrium theoreticals or theories, Hayek would worked with realistic concepts, and his vision of competition of the market or on the market, bringing forth beneficial results. And, you know, Eamonn being the head of the Adam Smith Institute, we all know what we are talking about. So bringing those beneficial results gave the essential insights into the economy as it actually works these days. And then there is another term that I would like to bring in at the very beginning, if you allow me, Eamonn. How much do I have left?
Oh, I don't know. I haven't been counting. But
Perfect. Then because I really need to put the term knowledge and decentralization of knowledge into the arena. This is something that Hayek was working on, and we always have to keep in mind. There is no such thing as full information, despite our nice little tools that we work with technology and that we think we can have access to everything. No, we cannot. So we have to be humble on that as well. Hayek was very focusing and telling us there is no such thing as full information. And because of that, connected to this is his understanding of the impossibility of centralized knowledge in our societies. It's decentral. And of course, the individual matters the most. It's the individual methodology that he focused on. So Hayek claims that knowledge is by nature dispersed among all those many individuals that we live with, that we work with, that we exchange. But it's in their minds, it's in our own minds. And by that, it is produced and clarified, and only through this interactions between all those individuals, we create added value and the knowledge process is defined. So his withering attack against social justice is, I think, well known to everybody. So in his Law, Legislation, and Liberty trilogy, which is, you know, unparalleled. When he said social for him is a weasel word. So for him, social justice is illogical. It doesn't exist. He would not need that. So we cannot speak of justice or rights of individuals claimed against society. Society is not a legal entity. And this is very important. I already mentioned that it's the individual who thinks and acts and not society per se. So for him, society is not, as I mentioned, something that that he can define. So he asked the question, who is responsible and accountable when we direct our claims for justice to society? And then this is what he describes or explains very well in law and law, legislation, and liberty. So his against the social justice is also connected with the valuable distinction between law and legislation. We have to keep that in mind, especially in our times when we are overwhelmed with all the regulations and the regulatory burdens that is imposed on not only the individual, but especially on enterprises. So law and legislation, huge difference. So legislation is created with the view to particular ends. Organizations have particular ends. Society, however, has no particular end. And it is a collection of individuals, an open field, therefore, to be governed by law. And then, of course, valuable contributions to this economic theory is the entire Austrian School of Economics and the entire business cycle theory. And maybe I should stop there, and we can come back to the business cycle theory, because what Hayek really did, well, back then, especially in this case with the business cycle theory together with Mises and the other Austrians, they were really explaining how economy will work or works, and what kind of models you can underpin, because the Austrians were not the mathematicians that we know these days. They looked through the mirror of society. How do businesses work and functions? How would individuals act? And that's a very important point, I think. And I'll leave it at that before we come to points of where probably Hayek was a little bit vague, for example, on the role of the state, role of the government, where you mentioned especially that some say he's a compromiser. I think he was an individual who thought things through. And the older he got, of course, he turned from an economist to a social philosopher. So this is also a huge difference.
Yeah, great stuff. Jennifer, why should we stick up for Ayn Rand?
Well, I guess I would almost invite us to take a step back to where we are today. And we think about what's driving today's resurgence of the popularity of socialism, or at the very least, a sort of social justice agenda, particularly among the young. Is it historical amnesia? Is it economic illiteracy? I'd say only in part. And this has been a theme that I've heard throughout this spectacular conference. And again, I just want to congratulate the organizers in pulling this together on such short order. It's been just a delight to be participating in it. Libertarians continue to fight socialism with facts and figures and historical examples. We say socialism is impractical, but we kind of shrink from arguing that it's immoral. And as a result, we are ill-equipped to address the true drivers of resurgent socialism, which are envy, victimhood, resentment, and greed, which Rand, I think, properly defined as the desire for the unearned. That's why those are the issues that we address at the Atlas Society through our animated videos, through our comics, through our living history. And actually, the living history might be a fun opportunity for us to partner with the Hayek Institute and the Adam Smith Institute. But also, those are also the reasons why I think that Rand deserves her due as the most important figure in advancing liberty in the 20th century, and that she also provides us with the most powerful weapons in fighting the forces of collectivism, of nihilism, of tribalism that we see arrayed against us today. There are three reasons why I believe Rand should win that prize as the most important warrior in the fight to set men free. They are: first, narrative; second, reason; and third, purpose. First, narrative. Since the first days of primitive men drawing on cave walls, since the days of Greek mythology, since the earliest days of various religious movements, man has told stories to communicate with other men. The very fact that Rand chose fiction as opposed to economic treatises, I believe, gives her perhaps somewhat of an unfair advantage against Hayek. She chose the language of the mythologists. She chose to tell stories rather than to trade statistics. She chose to fire the imagination rather than to reimagine economics. That's the reason she's frequently cited by the likes, no less, of the founder of the Cato Institute, Ed Crane, as the most important recruiter for the libertarian movement. My friend, and I know your friends too, Jeffrey Tucker, when I consulted him on this debate, he wrote, music needs more than notes and scales. It needs imagination, spiritual power, and romance, soaring melody. It was Rand who provided that to the cause of freedom. Mises said as much. If you look at the timeline of the rise of classically liberal thinking in the post-war period, it was Rand's work that gave it the enormous lift it so desperately needed. Without Ayn Rand, Jeffrey says, and I agree, we might never have seen the great changes that occurred in the 1980s. Second reason, and this I think gets into some of the more substantive differences rather than their differences in their choice of genre. Rand was unique in her insistence on reason as man's basic means of survival. To Rand, reason was not just a practical tool, it was a high moral virtue. She wrote, quote, "If devotion to truth is the hallmark of morality, then there is no greater, nobler, more heroic form of devotion than the act of a man who assumes the responsibility of thinking." If the case for individualism is grounded in the premise that that man is a rational human being, Hayek, in his, I think, fully understandable righteous indignation to condemn the so-called rationalism of central planners, may have inadvertently undermined the case for the rationality of individual planners, on which the case for individualism rests. While Rand held that the principles of ethics and politics can be understood and applied by any rational person, my understanding of Hayek was that he held the opposite, that reason cannot be established, that reason itself cannot establish moral and political truths, that individuals acquire their standards by socialization and imitation of other people. Third, purpose. As Nietzsche put it, he who has a why to live can bear with any how. So as to the why, Rand was revolutionary and unique among other thinkers in her unequivocal rejection of altruism as a moral purpose for living, and her defense of rational self-interest, of your right to your life, your pursuit of your own happiness. Hayek conceded from the beginning that, quote, "the desire for a collectivist system springs from high moral motives." And Rand, in her margin note, wrote, "There is no hope at all as long as the would-be defenders of individualism spout things like that." Rand was not an economist by any measure on Hayek's level, but in failing to go all in on the morality of individual self-interest versus what's best for society as a whole, I'd say perhaps Hayek had, at the very least, room for improvement as a claimant to the throne of the greatest thinker in the cause for advancing liberty in our times.
Well, thank you very much. Well, I mean, there's a lot of things there to talk about, but let's cut to the chase, right? You both mentioned the role of the state. It's Rand famously said that she wasn't a libertarian. She fell out with libertarians because she thought that the state had an important function in protecting our rights, so you needed a system of justice and so on. Hayek, again, famously talked about the need for government, obviously in justice, but also in emergencies and various other things. And it seems to me that certainly, as far as Hayek is concerned, there doesn't seem to be an obvious line between where the state has authority and where it doesn't. I think Rand is clearer, but again, is Rand perhaps, once you've admitted, well, the state does justice, it's so easy for that to be, you get mission creep and it expands and expands and expands. So what's your hero's views on the role of the state, in your opinion? Maybe Barbara might start.
Well, thanks, Eamonn. I think the point is that Hayek he was not vague on the role of the state, he was more realistic. And he realized that there is not a single model of government that could work everywhere exactly the same. So since he described the governing process as also as a spontaneous order, and different communities and different societies look different at the powers and of the governing authorities. So there is no one size fits all. And this is the great thing about Hayek, that he always claimed we have to take it from the individual level and take it there from there. And then, of course, when he saw the potential role of the state in many areas, in principle, he always agreed that it should be open for the private economy to comply and to work with the government and to provide services to the government. And he was advising many politicians, and he was very realistic about that. He was very down to earth and very in the front. Not in this case, he could take it from his theories, but he could translate it into practice. Whereas I understand that Ayn Rand was much more distant and did not, of course, provide those solutions. And of course, then if you look at when the free markets are coming up with better alternatives, which Hayek always promoted, the theoretical role of the state will go back to nowhere and not existing anymore. So I think this is very important to keep that in mind. And of course, maybe we can discuss a little bit about the true and false individualism in the essence between Hayek and Ayn Rand, because for him, Ayn Rand was the ultra-rationalist, and her choice or her explanation of individualism is totally different to what Hayek saw, and he always said reason has its limits, and you cannot explain everything only with logic, and that's probably also one of the big difference, and also why he probably was more a person of realism, especially when it comes to governing and to state and to the role of politicians in our society.
And Jennifer, I mean, as I say, if you admit that the state can do justice, don't you get into the problem that, well, what exactly is justice? What do you mean? How big should it be? I mean, justice is a big function, so you're already starting off with a big state. So, Rand isn't the kind of laissez-faire zero government person that she's often built up to be.
Well, she's not an anarchist, that's for sure. And she, indeed, as you mentioned, Eamonn, was highly critical of libertarians, whom she called the hippies of the right. And I think part of that might have been a little stylistic as well at the time. That she was seeing these various revolutions and the flower children and all of that, and so she was she kind of shrunk from that. But I think she was rather quite clear. She called for the complete separation of economy and state. For the same reasons that she called for a separation of church and state. And but she did believe that, she wasn't believing that reason was so absolute that there would never be any disputes between two different parties. And that she did believe that two perfectly reasonable people could disagree on a business deal or disagree on, some other kind of deal, a marriage or what have you that was dissolving, and that there was a role for a third party adjudicator, and that was the role that she saw for the state, that the police force and the military to defend individual property rights.
Barbara, you mentioned individualism and Hayek's individualism, which is absolutely true. It's a key part of him. But at the same time, I mean, when you think of individualism, you think, well, Rand is the ultra individualist, let's face it. And all of her writings, if you like, revolve around one or two people who drive things. And she believed in that entrepreneurs and people with vision and self-respect and commitment, that these were the people who actually drove society. Whereas Hayek seems to me to be saying, well, you have to get the conditions right, and then the whole of society becomes creative. Am I right or wrong on that?
Well, yes and no. To what extent that you have to provide the right framework? I'm an economist. I say on this hand and the other hand. But Hayek was always arguing, and as I mentioned before, provide the right framework for the individuals to be equal before the law, and also for the entrepreneurs to have the opportunity to use their creativity and their dynamism. And I think, especially when it comes to the framework, he was working on the dynamism and also by the diversity that we as individuals have, and we see this in our European economies. If we were allowed to be more diverse and compete with each other to a much larger extent, Europe would probably outperform a couple of other business locations. But we just stepped back and said, oh no, one size fits all. And Hayek was always arguing against that. And I mean, this is true for Rand, of course, too. But I think he was arguing in a more moderate, philosophical way, and also taking into account the political situation that he was in. With Rand, one probably thought, well, she's just hitting the wall constantly, provoking, and Hayek was more trying to find arguments. And at the same time, always warning against the pretense of knowledge that certain leaders would have. And of course, fight that so-called supremacy they think they had.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, Eamonn, to your question, it wasn't just that she was fighting for individualism, and she was extremely strong on individualism, but she did talk about these few atlases, these few creative individuals who were the fountainhead of wealth and of progress and of innovation in society. And I think that is also what makes her so enduringly appealing, is that it's not just that we as human beings understand the world around us or can communicate effectively with stories, but there's a hunger, for heroes. There's a hunger for an ideal. And the fact that, again, her books, she uses these concepts that she provided she presented the embodiment of the ideal human being, the ideal man in Howard Rourke is something that human beings have a hunger for.
Yeah, I that's an interesting take on it. I wondered that Hayek said that. I mean, his only hero, I think, was that he said that, no, we want heroes to advance the free society. We want to make the building of a free society an act of courage. And that's a very abstruse sort of idea. It's not like telling a story, as Jennifer says. And I wonder with Hayek and Rand, in terms of getting their ideas out into the world, who do you think has been more successful? I mean, on the one hand, Rand sells millions of copies every year in lots of different countries. I mean, mostly America, it's true, but lots of other places as well. Whereas Hayek is very much for the egghead, and he might have indirectly, well, actually, in Thatcher's case, directly influenced some world leaders. But his writing is very, it's not a good read. It's very long German type sentences, usually with the verb at the end, and it's not easy to follow. And doesn't that just put everybody off, do you think? I mean, who's the better? Well, I know who's the better communicator, but I mean, whose ideas have actually been communicated more?
Well, I think many in our libertarian pro-market freedom movement were attracted by Ayn Rand first, and then after having read Rand, came over to a whole bunch of other Austrian representatives, Hayek and Friedman and many other of our friends in the entire movement, living, and sadly those who have passed already, but their works are still with us. And of course, the only popularized, if you want to put it in this terms, work by Hayek is the Reader's Digest version of The Road to Serfdom with the cartoons, which is simply at least much simpler to understand and easy to read, whereas all his other works from the Constitution of Liberty or Law, Legislation, Liberty, and all the other, especially the economic works at the beginning, are totally difficult to read. And as you mentioned, I mean, English was not his mother tongue. It was German. He was educated in Latin. So you can imagine how long those sentences were that he constructed. Of course, the same is true for Ayn Rand. Her English is not her mother tongue either. But still, Hayek, unfortunately, never learned or never had obviously the ability, or was not interested in learning to say subject, predicate, object, full stop, that's it, and just make this appeal. So here he has a huge disadvantage against Ayn Rand. And then, of course, he was addressing a total different group of people. He was a scientist. He was the one who wanted to dispute and to attract readers of his ilk, and academia, and writing academic papers is a huge difference. They are still very boring these days than reading novels. I mean, all our students know that, and everybody who is reading dailies knows exactly what is going on. So this is, you cannot compare apples and oranges on that case, I would say. They both had their great ideas, and they both were great intellectuals, but they used different tools in their ways to exchange and to transmit their ideas. I think so. By that, I would not go further in this topic.
Yeah, I think it's clear that that Hayek's ideas have penetrated the political debate, if you like, along with Friedman as well, who was a hugely great communicator. But Jennifer, in terms of Rand, there aren't many politicians around the world, more in America than anywhere, but in most other countries, people don't say that they're a Rand supporter or they're an objectivist in politics. So has her ideas actually, do they just shape the minds of young readers, or do they actually have an influence in the public debate and political reality?
Yes. Well, I think that there are waves. There are waves. There was a wave of a kind of a Randian popularity, and then there was a whole wave of Hayekian popularity, and almost a fetish. With creating T-shirts and pins and things. And I almost welcomed, when I took over the Atlas Society a little over 4 years ago, and I had been driving around for 20 plus years with an Ayn Rand license plate. And I had noticed this sort of shift in society of, getting my car scratched or getting people giving me the finger to people having no idea what it was. And that was before I came to take over the Atlas Society. And I actually welcomed that as an opportunity to reintroduce Ayn Rand, that rather than sort of saying Ayn Rand and having people have a conniption fit, that I got sort of a blank stare. And I said, this is a wonderful opportunity to destigmatize and to present her in various ways as well, including as a very important female immigrant novelist and philosopher. So I think that Ayn Rand still has a lot of influence. I think it matters very much how the ideas are conveyed. I think that one of the things that Barbara talked about in terms of maybe a humility of having a debate and having open exchange and trying to persuade others to your ideas. I wouldn't go as far as endorsing humility, but I certainly would not recommend sort of a dogmatism, you must accept everything or you're evil approach to promoting objectivism. I mean, obviously that we're the Atlas Society. So I think that perhaps you don't see as many politicians, although when Donald Trump was asked, and maybe it's not an endorsement in this crowd, who his favorite author was, he did say that it was Ayn Rand, and he pointed to The Fountainhead as his favorite novel. But I find actually, perhaps not politicians, actually, if you read Ayn Rand and you get turned on by it, you might not say, I'm going to go and like run for city council. You might say, you know what, I'm going to go and I'm going to start a new technology company that's going to completely revolutionize, how we have energy or how we, have food supply. So I think that the ideas are still there and are increasingly relevant. I mean, right now, the ball has sort of been kicked to our court in a way, because we're talking about things like racism, we're talking about things like social justice, we're talking about things like equality or equity, and is it bad and is it good and what? So I mean, those are the areas where Ayn Rand has a lot of relevant things to say.
Interesting what you say about your registration plate. And when I was a student, I was put off Rand because it seemed to be too sectarian and divided and all the rest of it. And it's only in time that I've come back to it. And I think time has settled a lot of those early problems. And now people can look much more objectively. But the guys in Australia have fielded a few questions, I think, that they would like us to. We've only got time for one or two, I think.
Yes, we have, Eamonn, and thank you to all three of you for what you've said so far. It's been a lot of fun. But just to put before I put the question to you, my own view on this is they're quite complementary, Rand and Hayek, and in the sense that Rand is the gateway drug that you give to someone at the party, and Hayek is the stuff that the hardcore junkie is taking under the bridge. It's kind of one in a way leads to the other. But I want to remove the verses from the title of this segment for a moment, the Rand versus Hayek. And I want to take a really big step back and say, well, Rand and Hayek, and let's say Friedman, pick your flavor of Friedman, the Milton, the David, or the Petrie. And by the way, Petrie Friedman is actually right now in the social chat for those of you who are paid up members for tickets. If you wanted to have a chat with Petrie in the socials, head there now. But all of these different philosophers, I think one of the flaws that we have as libertarians is that we can kind of, I'm more of a Randian, I'm a Hayekian, and we throw these things out as if they mean something, and then someone new comes along who's just kind of interested because they're sick and tired of the government bossing them around, and all of a sudden we're like a bunch of aliens talking this completely foreign language. So could you just give us a rundown, each the respective author and thinker that you're arguing for, why are these people important, and what value do they bring to someone who is new to this world? Why should they be interested in what your author has to offer?
Yeah, well, this is why I'm in the think tank business. I see these guys are like the scientists, and I'm an engineer. They develop the theory, and I have to build bridges with it. and I have to build bridges to the public so that they actually understand all of this stuff. So yeah, that's right. There's, and I think the role of the communicator, Hayek in fact wrote about this, the role of the communicator is much misunderstood. In fact, I think Hayek was quite wrong on this, because he thought that intellectuals, as he called them, were all left wing. Well, I don't know if I'm an intellectual, but I'm not left wing. And I think there are many people in the free market movement who really are spreading ideas like he said, but are not remotely left wing. So I think you need both. Yeah.
Let me add. I think times have changed. Back then, when Hayek was working and Rand as well, there was no such thing as the technology that we have these days. From back then, it was top down. It was the intellectuals who he thought would shift and make the ideas. Right now, we have the opportunity, because of modern technology, to do this bottom up. And I think the mix that we see these days now is the interesting thing, and that will help advance the ideas. And in short, I think they were both defenders of freedom, individual freedom, but also entrepreneurial freedom. And I think this is the most important value that we have in our lives. And defending those values is important. And this is why we all, libertarians, pro-market people, should stick together and not be divided in one section or the other section. And the enemy out there, if you want to put it there, or the intellectual opposite, is doing much better on that. They stick together. We have to do the same, despite being individuals or highly individualistic.
Yes, I agree. We don't need to have the circular firing squad, except when it's in all good and fun, because, sometimes that is a little bit more interesting to watch. And we do have a very competitive marketplace out there in terms of a lot of options that students and viewers have. I guess in making the case for Rand, it's not just that she has these wonderful, entertaining, sexy, totally politically incorrect stories, but that after she set aside her endeavor of fiction after an enormously productive career, that she set about sort of systematically developing her philosophy. And, again, sort of an unfair advantage, because Hayek was talking about economics, which is one branch of philosophy, but she has a wealth of wonderful teachings and lessons on other issues of metaphysics, of epistemology. How do we know? What is the nature of reality? And politics, economics, but then also aesthetics. And even if you don't necessarily agree with her particular music choices or her particular artistic choices, I think it is a very interesting framework to use to think through what we do find beautiful and what we do find uplifting in the world. And so I think that's part of what she has to offer that's unique. But at the end of the day, I would say, kind of going back to the wealth of nations, what was driving the wealth of nations, and it was specialization, and it was the fact that you had different people doing different things. We wouldn't want to be doing the same thing. If Barbara won the debate and that meant that I was going to just be promoting Hayek, or I won the debate and that meant that she was going to be just promoting Rand, that would be a loss for liberty. It's a wealth for liberty that we have a diversity of perspectives and a diversity of specialization within the movement. Even within the objectivist movement, you have different views, different ways of approaching the material, and that makes us stronger.
I've got a question for the panel, and it's a little bit of a curveball, but what the hell, we're at the end of the session almost. I very flippantly said I was more inclined towards Rand, but that's got an element of truth. Rand, when I read books like Atlas Shrugged, Ayn Rand spoke to me in a way that no other writer on our side of politics really did, for the reasons that were explained, that she explained liberty through fiction, through narrative, through storytelling, through grand prose. I guess my question is, why don't we see more right-wing novels? Why don't we see more right-wing songs, right-wing movies, for example? Why is it that explaining political philosophy through art is generally speaking the domain of the left?
Well, Hayek answered that one, didn't he, Barbara?
Yeah, you need both. You need the theoretical underpinning, and the basics, and then you need the translation via think tanks, via movies, via whatever, novels, cartoons, any articles, op-eds, anything that helps to spread those ideas and translate into simple language.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what we do every day, all day at the Atlas Society. Is we are doing things that a lot of people were just freaked out about, that, oh, you're dumbing it down, it's a cartoon. But no, it's art, and it is a recreation of reality according to values that we hold are enduring and important. So I think that we just need to be taking more risks now more than ever. And I think we need to be willing, as I think one of you said, move fast and break things, including be willing to, fall on your butt, and do something stupid, and and support each other in doing that. I just think that also we have a culture right now which is very, very negative, but there are also, I think there are movies out there that are celebrating these values. They're few and far in between. The Ford versus Ferrari, I mean, that was an extremely pro-American, pro-masculine, pro-business movie. Self-Made, the series on Netflix about the first African-American millionaire who was a woman in the United States. Parasite, which is a Japanese anime series on Netflix, which incorporates weirdly sort of objectivist themes. So they're out there, but talk about them, support them, share them, and make better use of social media.
May I add one thing?
Absolutely.
The division of labor. This is what Hayek taught us. And I think this is so important, that each of us in the libertarian world does what he can do best. Yeah. And then we will succeed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Eamonn, did you want to close us out with any final thoughts?
I think that we've had some very good defenses of these two heroes, but as I think we've all agreed that they are indeed two heroes, very different in their way, but mutually supportive. Even if Ayn Rand thought that Hayek was a bit of a compromiser, and he thought he was too strident. But never mind that, they do address different audiences, and they grab audiences in, and some of us come back to them in later life, having read the books at university and so on.
I guess
sorry?
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I guess the moral of the story is you put 10 libertarians in a room, you get 30 different opinions. So we are nothing if not fond of internal debate.
And that's just the way it should be. We need diversity.
Yeah.
And that is what will drive progress and creativity. Yes, that's the future of progress, is having creativity and lots of different minds coming up with different ideas.
Well, Eamonn, Barbara, Jennifer, thank you so much to all three of you for giving us that time, for participating in the 24 Hours of Liberty. That's been a fantastic session, and we're very, very grateful for your time.